Everyone to our San Francisco Products Account webinar. A little fun fact that product-led growth was actually coined as a term in 2016. But the principles that really product-led growth is kind of built upon had existed prior to that. And as we've seen, though, this term kind of come to new life in these recent years, we've seen really the emergence of growth teams or growth product managers, this new breed of product management. And so I'm really excited to have Albert as our guest today to really unpack growth teams for us and how to hire for them, how to build them and scale them. So lots of fun conversation there. But before we jump into that, I want to share some fun facts about Products Account, because this is really an amazing community that you all should be leveraging to its maximum. Being here today is a great way to leverage it, but let me tell you about some other ways. So this is a community, first of all, of over 500,000 product people. That's an incredible amount of product people. It is one of the largest networks of product managers in the world. And there's thousands, over 3,000 videos, podcasts, articles on the website. And many of these are authored, by heads of product, heads of, parts of the product organization, or even C-level executives. So lots of really great content out there. So I like to say that if you're really looking for an expert level take on a particular topic, you will find it out there on Products Account or the Products Account YouTube channel, which is hosting, all of the videos like today's session that will be recorded. Let me assure you of that. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about myself before we continue. So outside of my role here as the San Francisco chapter lead for Products Account, I am the Chief Product Officer at NeoGov. And if you don't know NeoGov, we provide a robust HR and public safety platform really built for government entities to provide them with an experience that's really designed specifically for their needs. But you're not really here to see me today. You are absolutely here to see Albert. So let's get into the main topic. So Albert Cheng, who is the head of product growth at Grammarly, is here with us today. And if you don't know Grammarly, it is an AI-assisted writing assistant that's relied on by over 30 million people and over 70,000 teams. Those are staggering numbers, like just thinking of 30 million people. And previously, Albert led growth and monetization at Duolingo, the world's most fun and popular and top grossing education app. Albert is passionate about building action-oriented teams that make delightful products, and he's done this successfully across a wide range of industries and different company sizes. So for today, as I said before, Albert is going to share key lessons from how to hire and to scale growth teams. Now, one final reminder before I turn it over to Albert, which is the kind of first half of this session will be him kind of presenting to you. The second half, you get opportunity to tap into this expert. So post your questions into the Q&A section of Zoom. And if you're not a Zoom pro, get that ... more at the bottom of your screen and click on Q&A. So feel free to queue them up, and then I will be moderating them to Albert at the end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Albert.
All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Denise, so much. This is actually the first external webinar I've ever done in my whole career. So really appreciate Products That Count for the opportunity. And thank you all for being guinea pigs and listening with me. So let's get started. Maybe I'll start with a picture. It's not a stretch to say that building growth teams is one of the most rewarding and fun things that I've done throughout my whole career. And so I'm right here in the blue t-shirt. And this was part of our growth team at Duolingo. And we were having fun at Topgolf in Pittsburgh, where Duolingo is headquartered. Always humbling, shanking a golf shot in front of all of your coworkers. But super fun. And, I hope for all of you that you get a chance to join or build an amazing team like this someday. And hopefully this talk can just be useful in, imparting some nuggets of wisdom along the way. All right. So a bit about my career journey. Been very fortunate to have worked in some of these like iconic companies and brands, from YouTube to SoFi, Duolingo, and now at Grammarly. And despite these companies all being astronomically successful in its own way, I was there during each of these journeys at a time where, in some ways, like the core business was saturating a little bit, or there was increased competition, and so there was a desire to think about what is that next horizon? How do we reignite growth? And at YouTube and SoFi in particular, I was more focused on growing new initiatives outside of their core product. So at YouTube in particular, I was working on their verticals, so live streaming, gaming, sports, basically building new destinations and features targeted toward that specific audience. And at SoFi, at the time, the company was very much known as like a student lending product, just a website product. And they were trying to undergo a transformation to be mobile first and a personal finance company. And so I was a product leader for the invest arm, so working on stocks and crypto and robo advising and all that kind of fun stuff. And then at Duolingo and at Grammarly, I've been head of growth and monetization, really growing the core business holistically. So not really thinking quite as much about new initiatives, but more about the core thing. And so at Duolingo, was there for a few years, got to see the company go public, stand up the growth area, and then over time also lead the monetization area. And similar story at Grammarly, really extending the growth discipline and area within the company. Some more complexity in certain dimensions where, Grammarly is more of a B to C to B, whereas Duolingo is more pure consumer. Happy to talk more about that in a minute. But, in a nutshell, this is my career journey, and growth is very near and dear to my heart. And I've seen it applied across many different industries and company stages. Awesome. So over the next 10, 15 minutes, I just want to touch on a few different themes as it relates to building and scaling growth teams. So first, I'll start with the why. Why do you need a growth team to begin with? And when is the right time to go hire one? And then I'll kind of step that into, okay, let's say you do want one. What are the characteristics that you might look for in your very first hire? Typically, what is the makeup of a growth team in terms of its functions? And then how might you like interview? What are some characteristics that you might look for in people that you want to hire for growth? And as Denise mentioned, really I think the most important part is the Q&A, quite honestly. As I put together these slides, I kept a pretty medium altitude in an effort to make this broadly applicable for people. But hopefully the Q&A is like the moment where we can dive deep on the specific questions and, curiosities that matter most to you. All right. So I'll start here. Paul Graham of Y Combinator wrote a timeless article back in 2012 where he made the claim that startup equals growth. Like literally the definition of a startup is that it's a company that is meant to grow fast. And so I like to start here when talking about growth teams because I find it to be, a horrible mistake, right? If the founders of a company are not thinking about growth pretty early on. And even at later stage companies, right, it can be also a mistake to put the entire onus of a company's growth on a growth team or a growth area. That's really not the purpose, and it's meant to be a collective effort. And I'll talk through the various stages, but I kind of want to start here because, a company being successful is inherently tied to it growing over time, and that very much is a team effort. So I want to separate out this concept of like company growth with like the growth team itself. Related, but slightly different in ways. So where do companies usually start? Well, usually they'll start with a core product team. Sometimes these are the founders, maybe they'll hire their first PM. And the intention is just to build new features that find and strengthen product market fit. So you've got a problem in the market that you want to solve. You want to validate that it is indeed an important problem and a deep pain point for people, and that your initial solution, your kind of features that you're bringing to the table, do solve that pain point, simply, powerfully, efficiently, so on and so forth. And so usually at this stage, there isn't so much like a growth team. You want to start with the core product and ensure that you've got that product market fit. You can determine some of this by qualitative signals, right? Your target user is raving about, your product, but also data signals too, like things like retention give you some early signal here. As you kind of expand out and we build a product organization, there's usually some areas or team types that get built. One is certainly platform, right? At scale, you need to ensure you have the infrastructure. Certain companies will have security, privacy, trust, safety components. And as you kind of scale up the company, there's also a focus on internal tooling. So, teams have leverage to go build. Then over time, you might think about expansion, right? So what's the next horizon? As I talk about my experience at YouTube and SoFi, for instance, is very much about this. It's like new markets, new verticals. And even at Grammarly, we think a lot about how is generative AI going to transform the workplace, right? How do you leverage technology shifts and whatnot? So sometimes there's 0 to 1 teams that get oriented around that. So I think what's left is growth, and growth is really, really important. And I think it's been hard to kind of define the core purpose of growth simply, but I wanted to give it a shot. And to me, I would say what a growth team is supposed to do is connect users to the value of the product. Within a company, the folks that work in growth should have the best mental model of what makes the company grow, what are the key levers to go drive it, and a good understanding of the user journey kind of from end to end, both in terms of what types of users do you have, what are their needs along the way, how do you match that to the specific features or even the paid plans if you're talking about like freemium subscription models, which is what my experience has been. So put simply, connecting users to the value of the product. Fun little icon our designer created at Grammarly. But I repeat this in all of our all hands all the time. Okay, great. So let's say that we do want to go stand up a growth team. Where do we look? So once again, I would first pause a bit and ensure that you've checked a few things off. One is that you do want to have some sign of a product market fit. If you don't have that and you simply pour a bunch of resources on like your funnel, you end up with a leaky bucket somewhere. And, if you haven't kind of cracked that core like solution, problem, market, combination, you may find you actually need to pivot the whole idea or something like that, right? And so building like an acceleration team like growth on top of that can be a big mistake. So make sure you've got some signs of product market fit. The second thing is growth teams leverage data, probably arguably more than other teams in the organization. And so you want to ensure that you have a sufficient user base and you have some basic data instrumentation. So you've got dashboards, you're able to potentially run experiments, more so on the consumer side than B2B, where B2B maybe have less traffic. But even still, you want some data foundation in place. And then thirdly, even though I think it's generally okay at early stages to think about a generalist, I still do recommend having an opinion on what part of the growth motion or growth model is the most pressing. And I think from that, you get a bit of a waterfall of the type of person you might want to hire. So door A, B, and C. So door A, I would classify as acquisition. If your top priority is, I just want to find more of these people that say that they love our product. Great, right? I think the type of person you're usually looking for here is a data-driven growth marketer. These are people that really understand paid acquisition channels. They may understand SEO, community, content loops, templates, things like that, right? So usually this like kind of first person is running a number of tests across different channels and looking for efficiency and finding that 1 or 2 distribution channels that are really going to scale for you. So that's the acquisition piece. In bucket B, I would call this like the retention bucket. This is a very common place for a growth PM to start. And I would say like this includes things like the sign up, the onboarding flow, activating users into features. There's often some component of like emails or notifications or in-product messaging, right? That increase the retention of your user base. A company like Duolingo relied on bucket number B a lot, right? Making sure users developed a daily habit of using Duolingo was a tremendous lever for the company, which I'll actually get to in the next slide or two. But it's different for every company, but I think retention is often a bucket that is actually underinvested in. And then door number C is around monetization. So perhaps you've got, some of these core pieces figured out, but you haven't quite cracked your business model. And so a lot of times your first hire here will be more of a business or finance oriented, like PM, if it's perhaps B2C. You could test different monetization models, subscription, freemium, ads, in-app purchases, so on and so forth. Or if it's a B2B model, maybe this is like your first, salesperson. So I would say like form some opinion on where you want to start. That helps you, write the job rec, think about like the type of person that you are aiming for, and hopefully they can find success in this specific bucket or category and then expand it over time. Great. So this is an example of a growth model at scale. It's certainly a lot more complex than I might recommend companies start. But just to give you an idea, like this is our model for user growth at Duolingo while I was there. And so the boxes that you see, starting from new users, current users, resurrected users, so on and so forth, represent the user base of Duolingo across its entire history. And basically what we did was on a daily basis, you could go from a new user to a current user if they retained, and you would have retention rates. So new user retention rate was NER, current user retention rate, which is like an existing user that comes back the next day. Think about like a Duolingo streak being extended from 15 to 16, right? You would have all this. And basically we charted out historical data over many, many years and forecasted out if you can move certain retention rates by 1%, like how much does that move the needle for our daily active users, which is kind of like our North Star metric. And what we were able to uncover was that although originally the company put a lot of focus on our onboarding flow and new user acquisition, new user retention, by far the biggest lever was actually on current user retention. And so we stood up a retention team and kind of expanded out a bunch of different retention oriented like efforts around that. And by putting a like disproportionate amount of emphasis on that specific thing, the team at Duolingo was able to run lots and lots and lots of different experiments and gradually move the metric that we had extremely high confidence would correlate to daily active users. And being a subscription business, daily active users was also correlated to revenue of the company. So this is probably overcomplicating it to many folks, but this type of exercise I thought was very illuminating and gave our growth team a map of where to staff teams, where to focus, and what key metrics to orient around. Great. This is yet another example I borrowed from Lenny's newsletter, but it's under the concept of you just need to understand the equation of your business. And so I wanted a corollary to the like bottoms up consumer thing that I just showed at Duolingo. This would be like a top-down B2B company where like perhaps the North Star metric is ARR. You think about leads, win rate, contract value, things like that, so that you can actually have very, very different types of growth models within companies here. Awesome. Okay, so let's say that you've kind of built your equation, you've got your first growth hire, and you're kind of expanding it out. What's unique about a growth team? Well, to me, I would say that growth is multifunction, is probably the biggest kind of differentiator here. So as opposed to a more traditional EPD team, engineering product design, I like what Miro calls like amped. I think some other companies do that, which is analytics, marketing, product engineering, design, fun acronym. And this chart, they interviewed like a bunch of different growth teams and just said, hey, what's the makeup of these teams? And so what you'll kind of see is that growth teams tend to have a handful of engineers, no surprise there, maybe one PM, maybe one designer, also no surprise there. But then you'll see a kind of wider spread in terms of growth marketer. And this ties to my earlier point where, if you are at that stage where acquisition is perhaps the biggest priority, maybe you'll have growth marketers that are responsible for various channels that you own. And so you may skew a little more heavy on the growth marketing side, or if you lean on lifecycle marketing or whatever it may be. So I would say, once again, all of my slides, there's always a it depends part of the answer. But when you think about growth, it needs to be multidisciplinary. And what I usually recommend is that you kind of lay out the user journey and the growth model and put the functions aside and layer on like what potential initiatives might you go build to be successful at that, user journey stage. Then layer the function. Don't end up with and product owns everything else. I think in a awesome Google Images rabbit hole, trying to find like an example of like what are characteristics of like people that I might look for when I'm hiring for growth. And this concept of like an architect slash builder like just resonated with me. I think architect because people in growth need to construct a foundational model. If you imagine, I don't know, I just went through a kitchen remodel at my house. And an architect has good understanding, right? Or what are the load-bearing walls? What are the other walls that are like, could be important, but could be taken down, and what's like total vanity, right? And it's kind of like that within a company when you're setting up growth. There are certain levers that you pull that matter much more to a company's success. And so you need that bit of an architect mindset to understand how do you kind of construct it and where to focus. But you also need that builder mentality of like, you need to be comfortable with risk. You are very hypothesis oriented. Unlike a core product team, which may have really like done a whole bunch of deep validation on the type of feature that they're building, and then they are shipping a thing out to market. Growth teams tend to use experimentation as a method to learn. So you have a hypothesis. You're actually, in many cases, quite uncertain. Like it comes from some insight from your data or like user research that gives you something to go try, but you're uncertain, right? And so you run an experiment to see if it works, and you try to learn from it. And so regardless if it wins or it loses, it gives you some lesson from it that makes the overall organization smarter and helps you understand your customer much better. The other kind of thing that comes to mind when hiring is this like skate to the puck concept. What I mean here is that if you take Grammarly as an example, I think historically Grammarly's been very oriented around B2C. Like our product has a bunch of individual users, 30 million as Denise mentioned, but we have a desire to move up market and work well in teams and organizations, right? And so as we do that, and as I think about expanding out the growth team, I'm purposely looking for folks that have some, B2B, B2C to B type of characteristics to add to the team, right? Because it helps. If I think about the next horizon and map that to kind of the skill set and experience that I'm looking for, that's often what I'm trying to do. The other example at Grammarly is that we've historically done very little in terms of personalization and segmentation. We've thought about our user base as students or professionals, but in the future, we would like to create a product that is much more personalized and tailored for you. And in order to do that, right, we need much deeper data expertise. We need a MarTech function, things like that. So you kind of build for the future, and like the next growth teams and growth people that you try to build need to be aligned with the direction that you're trying to go as a company. Great. And then I will end with, I probably need to go change this interview question, but wanted to give you an example of like something that I look for when I interview candidates. And this is like an example from an analytics interview. And, what I try to do here is I show like two totally made up graphs of like daily active users, right? And so I'll compare company one versus company two and start at a high level and then dig in like with the candidate, right? So at a high level, when you see two charts like this, is a candidate able to articulate some general high-level trends of what's going on, right? Imagine you join this company and you're looking at the dashboard. What sticks out to you? What's interesting, right? You might kind of call out some spikes. You might look at the overall trends over time, things like that. Then I like to break it down and say, okay, that's an interesting observation. Based on that hypothesis, what do you think may have happened? And if you're on the team, what might you actually try, right, across the spectrum to grow this company? Um, and so this is purposely open-ended, but it leads to an interesting conversation where you can explore the interplay between various metrics and just get a sense of the users, or not the users, the candidates' experience as you kind of talk through these things. I think another possible approach here is to take an adjacent product to your own and have the candidate go through it. Maybe you give them a heads up that you're going to, for instance, I'd like to talk through how ChatGPT grows, right? And then we'd have a conversation around the various growth levers that they might, already take advantage of or may take advantage of in the future. And so I like generally having these types of conversations with candidates to get a sense of their analytical rigor. All right. Fantastic. So that gives a bit of an overview of how I've shaped teams in the past, what I'm looking for, and now I'm excited to take some questions.
All right. Well, so just a reminder, please queue your questions up in the Q&A. I will get us started while you all get started asking questions, though. So Albert, when you and I talked, we talked about kind of how the growth team goals kind of align with the broader company goals and objectives. And you were giving some examples as a publicly traded company and as a private company, how your patterns of growth might be more coupled to revenue or less coupled to revenue. Can you
Yeah.
share with the folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the highest level of a company, there's usually some sort of user metric, right? Daily active users, weekly active users, monthly, whatever, right? That's tied to your ideal frequency of usage in your product, and you want more of that user, right? So there's usually some North Star metric there. And likewise, there's one on the revenue side. And so I highly recommend any sort of growth leader to start with that conversation with leadership, right? What do you actually care about the business? Obviously, in public companies, that's more obvious because they will report on those numbers. But even at private companies, make sure you have a conversation with the leadership team and understand what you are trying to actually grow. And then break that down into some leading indicators. A lot of times these metrics are lagging. And so, sorry. And so imagine you're trying to grow user growth. Maybe you'll care about, if you rely on paid acquisition, you might care about spend efficiency, like LTV CAC. You might care about how many new users you bring in. You might care what percentage of them get activated, right? And so you'll come up with a set of leading indicators to start out with and build a scorecard around that and essentially empower your teams or folks to go run after that particular metric and report back with high velocity on what they're learning along the way, right? And so that can give some structure in place for you to define what matters to the teams, for the teams to go execute against them, and then provide visibility up to leadership that whatever they're doing actually really matters for the business.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think, our goal is to move the needle. And I think a growth team, definitely has that ability to even move the needle very quickly, but also in a long-term sustainable way. Which maybe leads me to the next question, how do you differentiate between some short-term wins? I don't know, when I looked at that chart and I saw some of those spikes, I was like, huh, maybe that's a short-term win
Yeah,
versus
exactly.
long-term sustainable growth. And maybe share a little bit about some of the tactics that you've used or seen others use successfully in those different arenas.
Yeah, very, very good. You passed the interview. Um, Yeah, I would say look, unless your company is in truly dire straits, you have to default to long-term sustainable growth. Although, growth teams, I like to organize them by customer user journey stage, right? So acquisition, activation, engagement, so on and so forth. Um, And usually what I like to do is I encourage them to set their metric at the very end of their stage or even into the next stage, right? To try to avoid this like concept of, oh, I'm just trying to like boost signups or something like that, or like website visitors or something. It's like it's not as correlated to like user or business value in the long run. And so I generally encourage folks to think downstream about their like metric. And whenever there is tension, let's imagine, you know, take Grammarly as an example. We have a freemium product, right? I could put a paywall like right at the beginning and collect a whole bunch of money like today, right? But the way that we kind of sort that discrepancy is we think about lifetime value of the user, right? And so when we run an experiment, you might see, user retention go down and upgrade rates go up, right? By varying amounts, right? And so you want to kind of blend the two by running more of a calculation of overall like what's best for the business long term.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Looking at those sort of tension, whether you've got tension metrics or even that tension as you're describing it in the app. We get another question here coming in from the community. So how have you been navigating the stop and go momentum over the, oh, why? I'm not sure
Last
exactly.
year,
Last year, maybe, there you go, with market changes in AI.
I have not seen it stop. I've only seen the go, quite honestly. Um, yeah, honestly it's exciting being in a company like Grammarly that's like in the midst of it, right? I would say maybe I'll answer for a bit for Grammarly, even though this is not, I don't really want to speak for the whole company per se, but I think it's a really, really exciting time. Grammarly had been very successful over the years off of a fairly simple value prop of like, we can help you improve your writing, right? And it was around like proofreading and correctness at first. And when a lot of applications started adding like basic, you know, spell check or grammar check, right? The company has to innovate and evolve. And so they added tone and they added clarity and plagiarism checker and a bunch of things like that. And so we do foresee a future where, you may end up in a world with lots of, AI in every text box or AI assistants or something like down the line. And I always think back and root on like, what do users come to Grammarly for? Like, what is the main reason and way that people use our product? And for us, the way our product works is that you download a desktop client or like a Chrome extension. It works across your applications. And so we push and surface value to our users at the time that it is important to them and generally useful for them. And I think AI is a technology that can help us do that and provide much better personalization and support users across a broader range of the communication journey. So it's not just about, revising what you've written. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's really, really exciting time. I think we've got like an industry news channel that is blowing up like every day with with new advancements. So it's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind, but remember your customer, what they came to you for. Every sort of new technology, I think, is a blessing. You can leverage it in a good way to strengthen your value proposition with the user. And I really mean that. And so I think this is a really exciting time.
Yeah, I think that's super well said. I think that we can get caught up in the momentum and just want to put AI everywhere. I often hear people saying, oh, their customers are asking, where's your AI, roadmap? It's like AI is a tool to bring you, to your point, the
Yeah.
value that you're looking to receive. So love that that's where your focus is. Next question. How do you view the effectiveness of freemium offerings and any thoughts or best practices that you might have?
Yeah, honestly, I'm pretty biased. I've worked at two companies that are very best in class in freemium. I think some characteristics between them. One is that they have a really, really, really broad value proposition, right? Learning a language and like writing more effectively or whatever are things that are just pretty easy to explain and broadly applicable. And we want to showcase that to as many people as possible. So for us, and then on top of that, we have a mission, right? That really is oriented around like, offering this type of solution to as many people as possible, right? It's like a very broad kind of consumer-y type of mission. And so I think freemium fits very nicely in that model because we can deliver value to the broadest set of users. And as long as we can demonstrate value to them in a pretty effective way, over time, if they retain, some portion of them will upgrade, and that can actually be quite a solid business. I know there are not quite that many, like consumer subscription companies that have been public and are growing super fast. So it's tough. And that's why, once again, I admit that I'm biased working at two companies that have done it particularly well. But those are some characteristics that come to mind. Like you want to ensure like you have a broad, acquisition engine. It's fast, like time to value. And you have like reasonable premium differentiation you can layer on top that when you showcase to users, they'll be interested in like trying a free trial or like, we just started this thing where users can actually like pick up to 3 premium, like basically paid suggestions every day, even if they're a free user. So they get a taste of it on like the writing they care about. And that has done really, really nicely for us to upsell into paid plans. So yeah, I wish I had a more like generalist answer, but I can only talk about like what I know.
No,
Yeah.
but I think that's super interesting because I think what you're also highlighting there is the inverse of what you said. Like, what are the anti-patterns where this doesn't work?
Yeah.
And it's like, if I can't get fast time to value, I like to say I'm an enterprise gal through and through.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be really hard. So
Yes.
while there are some, maybe B2B examples where freemium might work, you also may find cases where they don't. And so I think your broad answer, your answer from your experience is actually a very relevant answer.
Yeah, and something that's really fun for us is that when we do sell enterprise deals, part of the pitch is that, look, inside your company, you already have 300 like users that, are like love using Grammarly every day. And look how much their writing is sort of improved because of it. Like you should think about bundling that up into a plan. So we get to avoid that kind of cold start problem by nature of having a broad user base. And so ironically, it's not just good for our B2C, it's actually beneficial for B2C too. So that's been a fun finding.
Yeah, frankly, I've used it and I've as a company, I've actually used it for my customers and embedded Grammarly into the application, which is great.
Awesome.
Next question for you. When the metrics stay flat, how do you determine if you should double down on the growth effort or actually improve core product or, maybe adding more functionality?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think you should always improve the core product, quite frankly. I've never worked somewhere where we're just like, oh, we're all done with the core product. We don't need to like strengthen, product differentiation or like continue building new features. I know I'm being facetious because that's probably not what you totally mean by your question, but I would never advocate for like stopping core product investment. I think you always need core product investment. I think it's more about um, how much leverage can a growth team provide at this like moment in time and where, right? Once again, if you're a brand new startup, I would ensure that you've got the product market fit first. And then if you're like big tech, right, growth generally will run more incremental like optimizations, but the user base is gigantic. So they're finding like kind of small wins, small in relative terms, but big in absolute terms. Whereas a company like Duolingo and Grammarly, somewhere in the middle. So when I look at my growth portfolio, it actually is a pretty broad mix. Like sometimes we are building like net new features, and sometimes we have big bets that we're taking, such as like merging two of our plans together. Like it's not incremental at all. It's a huge project.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we have teams that are working on like the onboarding flow that are running like pinpoint experiments on, specific things. So for us, it's sort of a broad spread. Yeah.
And maybe two things sort of related to that you and I talked about is number one, I was asking you like, how do you see these teams? Are they temporal? Are they more
Mhm.
permanent? And that might also give some idea a little bit to that answer about, hey, if metrics remain flat, maybe that also means something about the team composition.
Yeah. I mean, my general advice is like, if you can structure your growth organization by user journey stage, once again, like acquisition, activation, so on and so forth. And the reason I like that is because it does give the team some, well, one, like deep understanding of the user at a particular stage, but two, it gives the team itself some continuity. Like these stages are more intended to be permanent. Like, sure, you might grow teams faster than some other teams when you do it that way, but it allows the team to gel. And I think the magic of growth teams is that they are constantly learning, right? You have to run lots of different experiments to get a good handle of oh, all right, it's actually like these features and these messaging that like really resonates with users. So we're gonna, there's a concept of like explore and exploit, which is like when teams first get created, they're very much in explore mode. They're just kind of like wandering, scattershot. You're going to try a whole bunch of different things. And then you find like you ran some experiment and like, holy shit, this thing grew like our metric by 20%. I had no idea what's happening here. Right. And then that becomes kind of like an ongoing lever for the team that carries through for many quarters. And I think um, if you're too quick to like pivot teams and switch them into different focus areas, they just don't have the time to kind of gel and learn and be super effective. And so that's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other thing that you mentioned to me is that though sometimes you may reduce a team though at some point in time, or you may expand the team.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so they will remain constant, but they may, change in kind of size.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, couple more questions coming in. Have you tried the approach of a mass upgrade, i.e., turn on features in mass to your users, enable premium features for limited period, send communications out or some communication that clients can opt out if they want to, and then start charging the clients if they have not opted out by that deadline, sort of opt them in, and they get a
Hmm.
period of time where they have to opt out, otherwise they're going to start paying.
Um, Whoever asked this question, if you're open to like emailing me and like workshopping this a bit, I'd be pretty interested in knowing more about the details. I think this is a bit tricky to answer like just generically. I think the closest thing to what I've tried to do here is around trials and reverse trials and cardless trials and all that kind of stuff, right? Where maybe as another example, um, we do have a Teams product in Grammarly where we uh, there's kind of a back and forth. So like someone signs up for a work email, they send a request to the admin reviews the request, they can decide like whether to like accept the person or not. And so we've run a number of different like experiments around, is it more effective to have an like the admin send out the invite, the person to request and go back and forth, or even an auto join type of mode. And I think throughout these experiments, you do actually learn that the messaging to the user uh, on like how we kind of position this both inside the product and in the email matters a ton on whether they will actually like adopt a new type of setting that maybe is good for the business or whatever. So something like that comes to mind. I would say on the trial front, we have generally leaned into actually shorter trials and more real time, like you get a taste of this paid feature like right now. But this is very much tied to like the time to value is extremely short for a product like a Duolingo or a product like Grammarly. In the enterprise world, that's not the case, right? So like a, 1 day trial may be totally ineffective because the person hasn't actually like set up anything or, feels no lock-in or network effect or anything like that. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, I think those are some great tips. Um, Next question. Do you have experience cannibalizing a legacy offering? Basically, eating your own lunch to retain customers and spur growth versus relinquishing it to a competitor.
Um, yeah, kind of. I mean, there's always innovator's dilemma, right? At a certain company scale where you just get too stuck on the old thing. And it's actually a tough thing for growth teams because the old thing has a lot of users, right? And like when you run experiments and you hurt that, like your experiment's probably gonna like lose, right? And so sometimes it is important to follow the strategy and make sure that you get like alignment. This is the direction we're trying to go. It's a new customer base we're trying to service, so on and so forth. You make sure like it accomplishes the goals. So for instance, at Grammarly, like we've historically had about a 50-50 split between students and professionals, but we just did a brand repositioning that tried to strengthen our value proposition at work. And, we started putting a lot more advertising out, orienting around that. But of course, when you redo the homepage and you redo your advertising, there's negative downsides there. So I know that's not exactly eating your lunch, but it's kind of, right? Like when you are shifting the user mix that you are targeting, there's always going to be downsides that you see in the data. But I think it's okay. Like as a growth leader, make sure you get alignment from senior leadership that this is the right direction for the company. And you close your eyes and you still experiment, make sure you don't break anything. But yeah, I think that's the view. And I think also on top of that, the other uh, probably relevant example I have is that if we are trying to create a product that provides more effective kind of writing suggestions to users, by nature, that actually probably means that we surface fewer like word by word kind of spelling correction mistakes, and instead like up level that into higher kind of level suggestions that we provide to users. And so we are making intentional like UX trade-offs by doing that. And so once again, it's not like a wholesale eating our lunch, but as we kind of transform our core product, there's going to be things that you gain and things that you lose. And, sometimes you can't like step into that incrementally. You just have to decide as a company, this is our new strategy. We're going to make a wholesale shift. Great. Okay. Now that we're in a new baseline, now we can start like iterating on top of that, improving performance after that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that in the first example, like kind of the mix shift, you're probably taking it back to things like lifetime value. If
Yeah.
this customer mixes higher lifetime value for us, then we're okay with that trade-off.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
And so it's about thinking kind of those things through. You mentioned earlier that, to wait in hiring a growth person. Don't do it kind of from the get-go. And so in absence of that, who's doing that role? I'm curious.
Yeah. At the very earliest stages, it's like the founder is doing the initial work to, build the thing and acquire customers. I think in consumer, oftentimes it may be like a first marketing hire or something like that, where they might not even be particularly classified as growth, but it's the intention, right? That they, try to map your product to the market and try things in that atmosphere. And in B2B, it could be, your first sales hire. Actually, B2B could be marketing too, right? Maybe that's the wrong kind of framing for it. So I think you're right that like, somebody may be doing growth like things, but it may not necessarily be a whole, growth discipline or a growth team at that particular stage. That's very possible. I think actually increasingly, I don't know if increasingly, but certain companies have been very, very successful without like, kind of delaying a product team until they're like 50, 100 people anyway, too, which is a whole nother kind of topic, right? So sometimes it can take some time and you can like grow to a good amount of scale, right? Before you build in a, proper growth discipline and growth practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. For some of the folks here, I suspect that they're maybe not growth folks today, but they're interested
Mm.
in kind of a path to being on a growth team or being a growth PM. And so what advice do you have like for somebody in that scenario?
Yeah. Um, when I think about learning anything, there's kind of this like framework of the three E's. I'm going to butcher this, but it's like, education and experience, and I think it's exposure. Maybe I got that wrong, but um, so I like to think of like make sure you spend some time in each of those, and that helps you get up to speed the best. I think on an education standpoint, um, unless Products That Count has a course I don't know about, maybe we should talk about that. But the kind of best in class that is referenced a lot is Reforge. Reforge has a growth series that is got like every possible like component of growth that you could possibly imagine, from growing teams to growth in, marketplaces to monetization to experimentation to growth models, all sorts of stuff. So they've got like a super impressive suite of like frameworks and, practitioners and experts to kind of learn from there. So that's a good spot. I think experience wise, one of the personas that I like to actually hire from is this like field entrepreneur type of person.
Mm,
Um, and so I think the recommendation of just like, try to build a website or an app and like get some people to use it. Like, just get familiar, like run a paid ad on it, try to like create a landing page that ranks on Google. I don't know, just play around, like tinker, right? See if you can get people to use it. You don't need to like seriously try to make it into a gigantic business or something, but you'll learn some skills, right? As you like do the work of creating a thing and trying to put it out there for people that are outside of just like your own friend network. Um, And then I think like if you're in a company and you are in a team that's at least building features, right? You can start to develop some like growth mindset stuff, right? So as opposed to just thinking about shipping your feature and getting out the door, like think more intentionally about that acquisition, retention, and monetization framework, right? It's like, how are users going to find out about your product in the first place and why should they care, right? Is it a one-time feature that they're supposed to use, or are they supposed to use it on an ongoing basis? If it's the latter, right? What are the kind of hooks that might keep someone around, retain them, re-engage them, so on and so forth? And then lastly, like how might you monetize this type of feature? Should it be monetized? Should it not? Like what's your strategy there? And so doing some thinking around that and like sharing it in the organization can also help make that product more successful. You might be able to partner with a growth PM that may exist at the company and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, and I think exposure is actually kind of similar. If the company already has growth people, chances are they like, I don't know. I would say like growth people need to be humble that yes, we can impact some metrics in some ways, but ultimately like the core product has to be really strong. You've got to have the platform in place to scale it and make sure it, goes reliably and things like that. So I think growth people are always or should be always kind of open for partnership there. So just reach out. I think if you can kind of collaborate on building a thing together that satisfies growth metric they care about, but also helps make your product feature more successful, that's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I think about when you think about that failed entrepreneur, I think of the persona you're looking for as somebody who's gritty, who is willing to take risk. And you've kind of talked about some of those things today. And yeah, the other ways are really just find inroads in your community to have an impact.
Yeah.
And maybe just because we're rounding the bend on time, um, maybe the one final question, unless anybody else pops one in the chat quickly. I'll get a second and we'll see. All right, then we're going to go with mine, which is, how do you think about, kind of what's happening in terms of the future of growth? You talked about this exciting time with AI.
Yeah.
How do you see this discipline really continuing to evolve?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is even like the word discipline, right? I think growth has changed a lot over the past several years with, wonderful people like Casey Winters and Elena Verna and like all these kind of experts that are starting to share lessons that they've learned. Lenny's podcast, he's constantly interviewing like growth leaders and stuff like this. And even me being considered for this, I think this is awesome, right? But I would say like, best practices can be helpful, but should not be like a whole substitute for like critical thinking and doing the hard work of like developing the actual growth model for your company. I think some of these practices should be applied, but you should also make sure you do that foundational work to be effective. And I think as it relates kind of going forward, yeah, certainly AI will transform a lot of different kind of potential, channels that you think about. Certainly in, SEO is one example. AI will also create lots and lots of different content. So as people are like uh, inundated with lots and lots of material that's out there, how do you make sense of that and how do you help your product stand out? I think is tricky. Um, Product-led growth is certainly a big trend that I think will continue to grow, right? So both the bottoms up and the top down, right? How can more enterprise-oriented companies think about a self-serve motion and freemium models and vice versa? A lot of times a consumer business may actually have an opportunity with teams and organizations, and thinking about how the two can actually blend and support each other, I think is a really, really interesting topic that I'm personally very passionate about. Um, yeah, so I think these things come to mind, and last thing I'll say is like we're all trying to figure this stuff out with growth. Like it hasn't been a discipline for super long, and I have generally found that reaching out to peers at companies I really respect, the response rate is like through the roof because most of us are not competitors, right? We just like we're learning things, we're trying things, we can each save ourselves like lots of time. So if you do work in growth or you have, some hard-won lessons that you would also like to share with me, I'm more than happy, right? Just please reach out. I don't know if my email or like anything is attached as part of the invite, but happy to share it with folks.
Maybe your email is the best way to find you by an email, or should they find you on LinkedIn? Is that a good way?
Either is fine. Maybe LinkedIn is actually easy because you can't miss it. But yeah, I'm always happy to meet more folks and chat.
Well, I'm sure you saved a lot of people a lot of time today, like amazing insights, lots to share. And I think to your point, this is really an evolving craft. Product management is an evolving craft, let alone growth within product management. So, great to hear your perspective as somebody who's been doing this for a while. And it'll be fun to watch how that continues and how you continue. So thank you for sharing these insights with this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a blast. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.